Minnesota Legislative Report, the longest-running public affairs show in the region, now in its 55th season. Former state lawmaker Tony Surdich speaks with legislators from northern Minnesota and answers your questions on the air. Minnesota Legislative Report starts now.
Hello and welcome to the Minnesota Legislative Report. I'm your host, Tony Surdich. The 2026 Minnesota Legislative Session has officially come to a close, with lawmakers wrapping up work on a number of key issues impacting communities across the state. Tonight we'll take a look back at what made it across the finish line, what didn't, and what the results of this session could mean for you. Joining us today is Representative Leash Kozlowski, a DFLer from Duluth representing District 8B. Also with us is Representative Nathan Nelson, a Republican from Clover Township near Hinckley, representing District 11B, and Representative Natalie Zalesnikar, a Republican from Friedenberg Township, representing District 3B. Welcome to all of you. So now the legislative session ended Sunday late into the evening. You had some retirement speeches on Monday, so you're all working on kind of a lack of sleep. I guess overall, a question viewers have for us all the time is, why do you all wait to the very last minute to pass these huge bills? Why don't you get your work done earlier in session? What are those reasons? And Representative Kozlowski, we'll start with you.
Sure. Well, thanks so much for having us on the show today. It's a pleasure to be here. And yeah, the workings of the legislature, when we start every other year, one year we get to start in January and go all the way to May. This was our shorter session. And it really has to do with the deadlines that are set up by Constitution that determine when we start and when we end. And from there, we also work backwards off of budget targets. We get a chance to work through the committee process, which is really important. Obviously, we are all set here to make sure that we are including and centering and grounded in the voice of our districts, but also of Minnesota broadly. And so that is our opportunity to make sure that we have good public process in the House and the Senate, as well as working through to the end. A lot of the work actually this year is something we talked about coming in a 67-67 tie. Is many members wanted to see more individual bills. We could take them on by topic. And we actually saw a lot of that. Of course, at the end, it really came down to the agreements that need to be struck in what we call the global agreements across leadership to be able to make sure we come to an orderly end by midnight.
All right, we're going to get to a lot of those specifics in a minute, but Representative Zalesnikar, why does it seem to some viewers that all the big decisions happen in the dark of night, close to midnight?
I think that's a great question. I used to wonder the same thing. And now that I'm there, I can understand there's a tremendous amount of work as it was designed to start in committees. And then once a bill passes a committee, then it also has to have a companion bill in the Senate and has to pass in the Senate. If all those things happen, then it can be placed on the general register after it goes through the Rules Committee and makes all of its stops. If it has a financial obligation to it, it would have to go to Ways and Means. So it has many stops in multiple committees generally for a bill to even get to the House floor. But why it takes till end of session is because all of the committees have global targets that are agreed upon in a tie with a 67-67 on the amount of money, exactly the priorities. And then at the last week of session for the last 4 years that I've seen, it has been that the last week is getting those final bills done that need to be done for policy. And then dealing with, it's a non-budget year this year in 26. So we were faced with some significant budget issues to deal with this year. And so there was a tremendous amount of time on various issues that possibly wouldn't be generally happening in a non-budget year. But I think it went really well. We got out of session in a statesman-like manner this year. And I think that was really important for the people. We gavelled out on time. There won't be a special session. And, you know, in the prior biennium, what I saw in my first term was a 1,400-page bill happen in the last hours where nobody could see the bill. The computers were down, and so it was very frustrating for the public. And this year, that didn't happen. And so I thought it went really smoothly.
Representative Nelson, your take on the end of session.
I think the other two have pretty well wrapped summarized it well. And I will just say it's, just to add that we probably passed more single subject small bills this session than I have in my 8 years that I've served in the legislature. And I think that's says a testament to a 67-67 tie. The bills that did pass that were standalone, that were signed into law earlier in the session by the governor, they were bipartisan. We were able to get agreement in the House and then also in the Senate. And then with that, most of them really had little to no budget impact. And when we come into the final agreement, I'll kind of liken it to packing for a trip. Everything that you would like to take on vacation, but maybe you don't have room for everything that you want. And so as it comes down to that final agreement, being that we have to have a balanced budget here in Minnesota, we can't have anything that sets that budget out of balance. So that's really kind of the final package of bills, the final thing that ends up end up in the vehicle, ends up really having to be a global agreement. And really, otherwise we can spend some funds in areas or have some things that end up really messing up a final package. And that's really why it ends up being one final push at the very end. And it also can be a little bit of a dysfunctional workplace that we're in. Anytime they have strong opinions on either side, but we've got to get those things across the line, and I think that's a big part of it. But overall, it's really balanced budget makes the biggest thing, and I think it's a great thing that we have a balanced budget. But it does make it really is the reason that there's a big push at the very end.
All right, well, we're going to continue your analogy and start talking about some of those items that made it into the car on the trip, and we'll start with those first. And Representative Lesnikar, we'll start with you. One of the major topics of discussion was fraud this legislative session. We know there was a specific committee in the House of Representatives, and the two major pieces that passed was an Office of Inspector General and some more tools for the Attorney General. Do you feel what was passed is going to help combat some of the fraud we've seen in Minnesota?
I absolutely do. I mean, what I've learned is that this fraud has been going on at a level that began in 2019. And the federal prosecutors found almost $9 billion in alleged fraud. And we've seen, probably close to 50 prosecutions and money clawed back. So it isn't an allegation anymore, it's real. So I think it's really important that the legislative body now through the independent office is going to be able to select the candidates, to give a roster to whoever the governor is, Republican, Independent, or Democrat, so that there's separation of the executive branch. You can't have the Office of Inspector General reporting to the governor and the AG office, and they're monitoring all themselves. And so we've seen a lot of situations through the Office of Legislative Audit Reports. Our Representative Patty Anderson was a state auditor on the Republican side. She worked diligently last year. They had a bipartisan deal, and then it kind of fell apart in the House this year, and they brought up a new bill, which really was exactly the intention that Senator Gustafson and Representative Anderson had been working on for 2 years. So I'm really excited that it finally passed. I think it's important because they're going to have prosecuting powers in that executive or that independent branch, and they're going to be auditing the agencies. Part of the issue has been the fraud in the Department of Human Services, where the biggest budget we have of spending comes to the Department of Human Services. That auditor, the Office of Inspector General, was in that division. And so when all the allegations came from the employees, we had DHS whistleblowers that went viral before Christmas, stating that, we've been reporting things for years and we've been demoted, we've been harassed. So we put together a new line for that, for reporting. And I think the fact that we started a fraud committee because Republicans were at the table with a tie, that allowed us to get the first ever fraud committee. And we had numerous agencies having to come in to testify and to be held accountable. And the public is seeing now accountability where this independent Office of Inspector General will be able to hold agencies accountable and prosecute. We need to monitor internal fraud within our own agencies not doing their job and reporting when they know that providers have had a 700 spike in in utilization, that's a flag that common business practice would say this isn't right. So there was no site visits, and then making sure you're going to deal with it, stop payment and internalize, do an internal review. That didn't happen. And so we put a lot of provisions in place this year on nonprofit grants, on internal agency work, and then business providers, when they weren't vetted. All the rules were taken away during COVID. So all these companies started up in ways that no business would have ever started before COVID. And so we shut the door on all of those things so that we have the dollars available for the great providers. We lost providers in northern Minnesota that were great providers because everybody fell under the bucket of fraud when we had the governor set up a system with Optum in October and had a prepayment review because the fraud was so significant. So this is going to be a great win for Minnesota. It's going to actually have teeth in it in the sense of they're going to be held accountable and they can prosecute. So I think it's wonderful. And it was bipartisanly supported in the Senate and the House. So that's great news.
Representative Nelson, your thoughts, is what passed going to help stem some of the fraud that we've seen in Minnesota?
I believe that what passed will help that. And I have a little bit of heartburn because I don't like growing government. But I think also there is some, as Representative Lesnikar said, there's some checks and balances there that there's a bipartisan group of legislators that are part of naming or giving a list of names for who to select. So there's numerous people that is not just falling under one branch of government, and being independent is very important to be able to do this. So they can go in, and also probably the most key issue is having the law enforcement capabilities also, and making sure that we can go after those that are committing fraud, because it is something that, a lot of these programs are necessary. There's a lot of good that is happening through it, but when somebody takes and uses the abuses the benevolence of the state, that's a problem.
Representative Kozlowski, your thoughts on the measures that were passed and how that may address fraud in Minnesota?
Right. I think this is an example of an all hands on a deck approach, and we did decisive action that Minnesota's really wanted us to come in and shut this door and combat fraud. And really proud of as was mentioned, the bipartisan work, good work in the House and in the Senate around the Office of Inspector General. That is also making sure that we have subpoena and prosecutorial power, but making sure that those are separated. I also want to call out that Minnesotans will get a chance to be able to serve on those independent bodies and make sure that we are continuing to shut the door to fraud with Minnesotans at the front of it. I know that we also did really good work around establishing the Medicaid fraud unit, which shout out to my colleague Representative Matt Norris, as well as Rep. Patty Anderson on the work with the OIG office and many others who had a hand in that. These are really important. At the same time, we saw coming into session and throughout the kind of villainization around particular communities of color, around whole industries such as childcare providers. And I think we can both uplift and continue to support and, applaud those folks for the good work that they're doing, while also shutting the door and making sure we have backstops across many different sectors to make sure that the money that Minnesota taxpayers are putting for the goods and services that we are promised, and we deliver on those. Also, just want to say, we did really good work around making sure that we are tackling fraud in other avenues, whether that's through deed and the grant management and across those processes. And Minnesota Housing, I think, is a standout in our committees. We talked over and over again about how the oversight and the administrative work over the years, that those programs just have not had the same level of fraud. And so how can we use that as a blueprint across other agencies who are already doing a tremendous job in Minnesota Housing? How can we make sure that same approach is taken across all the state sectors and the agencies? And I'll just say, in terms of moving us back towards the public goods and making those work for the people, our greatest examples come from what it looks like when government delivers those services. And whether it's misclassification, which the AG's office is spending over a quarter of their time tackling actually employer fraud, which is funds that are not going to workers, funds that are not going to taxpayers by way of income and other taxes. And we know that, lunch ladies, lunch people, they're not committing fraud. They're getting the food out to the students in the schools, and that is something that we should continue to replicate. We worked really hard on the DFL side when we passed paid family medical leave that we don't outsource that, such as the AFLAC. We've seen that across the country, but that we take that in-house indeed and continue to put those measures and make sure that government is working for the people and that those services and goods are getting to taxpayers as promised.
So one other aspect of this, you all talked about audits and oversight, which happens at the end, but looking at fraud on the front end of things, something related that was passed was funding to increase IT and upgrade IT at both state agencies, but also for counties. Representative Nelson, can you briefly speak to if you felt this was also an important aspect of what was passed this session?
Yes, I think it's a great thing. And last session I had worked on, that was kind of one of my top priorities, was getting funding for the Social Services Information System, SSIS. And so there's two kind of units that the county uses, SSIS, and then they have the Maxis system. And both of these systems ran under DOS. I think there's probably most people don't even know what a DOS system is anymore, or anyway, most younger people. But it's a system that's quite stable, but it's also very old. And it's the Maxis system was from, I think, 1989 was when that was rolled out. I think for my generation, you remember playing Oregon Trail and games like that. It was a green screen, and it was currently a green screen, and so not having auto-populating fields and not having the little warning if you didn't have something filled out correctly that it would catch that. And so it was a system that desperately needed updating and really tying into it'd kind of have a patch and a Band-Aid for a long time, and it takes a long time, and we have to have these systems constantly running. And so as we do that, we need to be able to seamlessly use our current system while integrating a new one. So it does take a lot of funds, and there's a very complex system. So I think it's incredibly important to be able to do so. I think it's going to be able to help our social workers and our county employees and as well as at the state be able to do their jobs more efficiently and provide a better service to those to our constituents and the needs of our community.
Representative Kozlowski, do you have anything to add on the investments in IT upgrades?
Yeah, I honestly couldn't agree with Representative Nelson more. These investments, 75 million is going to go and make sure that we're bringing our human services infrastructure into the 21st century. I'll say, having served on the tax committee, we heard from counties and tribal nations across the state over and over and over about this outdated system, which, just for reference, I was born in 1988 and this system came on board in 1989. That's way too old, outdated. It has led to a lot of the reasons why we have slower service delivery, worsened program integrity, and really worsened retention and recruitment of employees. We got a chance to walk through this system of just one SNAP enrollment that took about 45 minutes plus for that social worker to be able to move through the application. They shared with us that it takes anywhere from a year to 2 years to really champion and get up to speed on managing this cumbersome system. And so I'm looking forward to it. It's really been a long time coming. Like I said, this modernization is going to mean faster service delivery, better program integrity, a lot of the stopping of fraud and misuse, and making sure that we're combating that on the front end has to do with bringing this system online for credentialing users in the system. So it's not just an IT upgrade. I would say it's really about how we're continuing to deliver on that promise of government working for the people.
And if these investments weren't made at the county level, counties would have to use property taxes to invest in these systems. Let's take a minute to talk about property taxes. There was a proposal of increasing the property tax refund program. Representative Lesnikar, can you talk a bit about that proposal that was passed?
Well, I think, one of the top things I heard from everybody back here in the district was my property taxes are unsustainable. And we have, more people leaving Minnesota. And the reasons a lot of them are leaving, that when I've asked them, is taxes. Taxes regarding seniors, still having to pay the Social Security tax in Minnesota for the higher income levels. And so they're leaving, and or their personal, individual, or corporate taxes. And so property taxes were a big deal to them. It caught them off guard. And that happened largely because there were so many mandates passed at the state level that went to the schools and the counties and the cities, but these ideas didn't come with funding. And so then it ends up being, when you mandate things for the schools and the cities and the counties to do, they have to get that from property tax owners. And so, it was unfortunate to me that we didn't see more mandate relief for property taxes when we had $18.5 billion surplus. I mean, we didn't see anything for property taxes in the sense of reforming the homestead or any of those types of programs, or even veterans. With disabled vets, we tried to pass the bill to have them have a higher exemption because house values are going so high, but everything got blocked. So, this year, people are getting, if they make, I think, under $145,000, they're going to get a couple $100 back, or a little under that. I wish it was more. It needs to be more, because the property taxes and the valuations are going so high that, it's something. It's not as much as I would like it to be. And that's something that I'm going to continually be working at, is to make sure we're not passing bills that are ideas that aren't fully vetted to be funded. Because if we're going to go into a structural deficit in the next 2 years, that is just passing an idea, because then the people that come back have to fix the problem that was created by an idea. So, and that affects people paying their property taxes every year. So yeah, it's great to have something, but a couple $100 when people are paying thousands and their property taxes are $5,000 or $10,000 or whatever they are, wherever they live in the district, is becoming unsustainable. So we're going to be at it again to reduce property taxes.
Representative Kozlowski, serving on the tax committee, can you talk about your thoughts on this increase in the refund program?
Yeah, absolutely. This was a big topic of conversation, and I think this is one of those areas where we see it cutting the other way, and had some very lively debate and conversation with Minnesotans, especially as it pertains to HR 1, and that actually pertains to the IT modernization. We're seeing that over 140,000 Minnesotans are set to lose their health care, of our most vulnerable among us. We are seeing mandates and added administrative burdens onto counties who are telling us that they just cannot handle any more strain. We're seeing that same burden on our hospitals and our safety nets that are already at the brink. And we're seeing that on homeowners, on renters. And so this bill is one that we came together across the House and the Senate with very different visions of how to tackle our biggest challenges that are really coming down upon us from the federal government. And we did that with a number of ways, as was mentioned already, the $125 million to get relief to homeowners. What I really advocated, and what many of us also fought for, was to say that renters should be included in that. Renters also pay and contribute to our communities, and it's unfair that our higher income earner property owners only get to benefit that. But we did also take measures here with TAB relief holiday and other ways that we're able to help with Minnesotans who we know are struggling to put groceries on the table, gas in their car. And what we hear in every single district is that the rent and mortgages are just too dang high.
One of the other big bills that generally is under consideration this legislative session is a capital investment or bonding bill. And this is when the state borrows money at a low interest rate to invest in infrastructure projects that have regional or statewide significance. You all passed a $1.2 billion capital investment bill. And when you do this, you need to get a supermajority of the legislature to pass it because it is borrowing money. Of that $1.2 billion, about a third of the funding went to water treatment infrastructure. Representative Nelson, can you talk about the capital investment bill and any specific projects you'd like to lift up that you were really proud of?
Yes, thank you for that. And I think it's the capital investment bill, as you said, it takes a supermajority to pass. And I think this bill was the highest, or in my recollection, and I think I've heard some from more senior members that it's the most highest vote receiving capital investment or bonding bill that has been out there. And so I think it really speaks a lot to being in a tie and making sure, really having to prioritize every area of the state. And one of the areas that I think that we see is water infrastructure, making sure that we have clean water for our communities, and not just our community, but everybody downstream. And one of the areas bill that I had in, it was in the Rush City area. It's extending a sanitary sewer system, and really, it's an important bill. But one of the important parts on that was it's about a $3 million project, and much of that is federal funds that came through, and so we had to have some state funds to be able to do so. And the important part was we had to get this done this year, otherwise we risk losing the federal side of the fund. So there's numerous bills that had projects that had been funded very much of the same way, that there's a matching federal or maybe some local dollars, and to be able to meet those needs, really spread out the cost to communities, and making the water projects, really making cleaner water for Minnesota and everybody downstream.
Representative Kozlowski, any projects you'd like to highlight at this point?
Yes, I'm absolutely thrilled with the $1.2 billion investment. These are some of the most important dollars that we have to make our communities more equitable, to really determine the trajectory of where we're going economically, as well as to make sure that we're taking care of our assets that we need to preserve into the future. And we had a $1.2 billion bill. To put that into perspective, we had requests from across the state toppling over $7 billion. So we know the need is there, even with a large target that we were able to come to with all of the caucuses coming together. Some here in Duluth that I'm really proud. Actually, Representative Zalesnikar and I teamed up on a number of these to make sure we get them across the finish line. But for me personally, the airport tower, seeing that project through, we're heading over to a groundbreaking today. That $4 million is going to unleash the federal investments as well as the local investments here. That's the gateway to the globe for us, an economic driver. The Duluth water plant, City of Duluth, these are dollars that are going to go to fix actually issues that the EPA as well as Minnesota Department of Health came in a number of years and said that we need to make fixes to filters, different systems, so that we can make sure that we're delivering water for Duluth, but also to our surrounding communities for years to come. For the Duluth delegation and folks across the aisle, the HRA Union Gospel Mission is one of the most important, impactful, transformational projects that we could invest in. That's going to bring on new units of transitional housing. It is going to bring an engagement center, a warming space, showers, all of these places that's going to make sure that we have dignity for our unhoused relatives, and also help to make sure that we're really investing in our homeless response system, which is stretched. We've seen a 53% increase in unsheltered homelessness in greater Minnesota. And so this couldn't come at more vital time. As I mentioned, that when the federal government walks back their commitments, like we've seen, especially around housing at the state, we had to step in already this year. We injected $9 million at the start of the session and another $4 million in our housing bill to plug the holes. And so this is another way that we're making sure that we're standing in the gap for our community. And the last thing I'll just say, there's so much we could go on and on, but personally, I also was able to get $1.3 million to do our land transfer rematriation of the Fond du Lac Band of Lake Superior, Chippewa. This is a land transfer from the University of Minnesota as well as the state of Minnesota, land that was stolen and taken, but that will be returned, representing a 10% of the original 3,400 acres of our homelands in the heart of it. That will be back in trust with the band, but also we'll make sure that for the timber industry, the researchers, the businesses that rely on what happens at that forestry center will continue into the future for many generations to come.
It certainly seemed that Northern Minnesota did a good job of getting resources from the capital investment bill. Representative Lesnikar, are there other projects you'd like to lift up and talk about?
I think it was wonderful for the trades, for our communities, for the business, for us to be able to thrive through the capital binding and really important projects. From the top of my district, we got some important funding to help get the utilities on the main drag through Highway 61 and downtown Two Harbors to help complete that project so that it wouldn't fall on the local taxpayers there. And that got to the finish line, as well as utility expansion for Rice Lake, a utility expansion for Proctor, which both of those will lend itself to more housing and commercial, growing their commercial tax base. In addition, I was able to get the sewer pipes replaced for the North Shore Sanitary District, which will protect Lake Superior, which was important to many. And so that is a old decaying system. And so we were able to deliver dollars for that. And I'm really happy to see the regional things too. You know, worked like Representative Kozlowski said, I was the author, but we worked together as co-authors on this bill for the Duluth Airport Tower, and we'll be going to the groundbreaking today. And that's just a wonderful thing for the region, as well as the important renovations to the deck, where you're bringing in, you know, business opportunities to this entire region with events that help the hospitality industry. And I was excited to be the author on the events for Minnesota, because we need to have more events coming to Duluth, Rochester, Minneapolis. And now we're going to get the National Football League draft in Minnesota through this Minnesota events. And so I want to see us. So I had a bill to have no tax dollars, no additional tax general fund money, but to utilize our existing resources to grow our events in Minnesota, like the National Football League draft. And that would give opportunity to Duluth too.
I'd be remiss as an Iron Ranger to say that there were probably several projects even further north, but unfortunately no range legislators on this show today, but several projects up north as well. We're going to spend some time. We'll come back to what happened, but now we want to take some time to get some responses from you on some questions we received from viewers. And the first topic where we got several questions is around the issue of childcare. And just to sum up what viewers talked about is childcare was repeatedly described as a crisis this legislative session, yet many families and providers are leaving feeling that little has changed and there wasn't meaningful progress this session. So we'll start with you, Representative Lesnikar. What, if anything, got done on the issue of childcare this session?
Well, childcare has been a big deal to me. As a working mom, I used family childcare, center-based childcare. I had somebody that lived in our home for a while, and I also used after-school programs. So my perspective has been we need to have a platform and policy that's going to allow all of these systems to thrive. And when I looked at all the data in my first term, I was shocked to see we've lost 50% of our family child cares. And really, we've just held our own on centers, but it has been very devastating. And so they say we have a desert of childcare. It's true. So we have an issue on the side of enough providers and enough slots. When you have to wait a year, 2 years to find an infant slot, that's unacceptable. We did in 23 change and we grew the voluntary preschool program at the school-based programs, which I was concerned about. I think it's wonderful, but I knew that if 3-year-olds were going to leave, 3 and 4-year-olds, that preschool age 4 was going to leave the family childcare model and the center-based model. That is the only group of age bracket where they tend to make money. They lose money on infants and they break even on toddlers. So I was really concerned about the stability for our centers, freestanding centers, and our family childcare. So I worked really hard in Children and Family to get the ratios increased for family childcare. We got that passed this year through a new license. That was really important. I also worked hard on the modernization. I met with numerous daycare providers on families and with centers, and I toured the entire state. And so while we didn't get a bill through the Children and Families Committee completed, many of those items got into another vehicle bill, and we got it done. While it's not perfect, we're going to continue working on issues for childcare. Two of the things I'm most proud of, two of my bills ran through the tax bill this year that provide a tax credit for employers who are going to invest in childcare for employees. So whether that's paying for slots or building additions or growing childcare in their community, they're going to get a tax credit. And the other one was for actual the working class, people that have flexible benefit accounts through their employer. Right now, they can only have $5,000 for a deduction in their flexible spending. It's going up to $7,500. So that's $2,500 of savings for families that use childcare. So I'm really happy that we got that to the finish line, and I worked really hard with the tax committee on that. And I worked with people up on the range and with the business of childcare and many, many people in the childcare lane that wanted to see things happen. And I agree with them wholeheartedly. We need to do more. We need to look at, balancing regulations. We had regulations on testing soil at nature-based childcares. We have Hartley and Duluth. We have many family childcares that are nature-based and centers. So we had to get reasonable. And a lot of the regulation reform, we dealt with that this year. And we also made it so that centers can have flexibility with their assistants so that they can modify and use staffing as they need without violating anything with child protection or safety. So I think a lot of great things happened, and not enough, if that makes any sense. We have a lot of work to do, but we are going in the right direction. And my goal is to stabilize the childcare industry.
Representative Kozlowski, your thoughts on our viewers saying not enough done, very little change in childcare this session.
I have to agree, especially with our childcare advocates who have been at the Capitol, in community, working side by side with us for solutions to our childcare crisis that continues to just compound with many, many challenges and a lack of investment. You get what you pay for. And right now, Minnesota is not paying and investing in childcare and making it the public good that it is. We've seen other states like New Mexico come together and find ways to get dedicated, sustained revenue to make sure that no family pays more than 7% of their income on childcare. Right now, it's really heartbreaking. We saw the Lakeside Early Learning Center in my district close its doors after every attempt. We know that many childcare centers are one burst pipe, one bad break away from closing its doors, just as this center did to the 60 families in Duluth, who are now scrambling because, as was mentioned, it's months, if not years, on a waiting list. One of the most heartbreaking stats that I saw was from the Federal Reserve survey that asked child care providers about their pay. And 1 in 3 providers in Minnesota indicated that they're not even taking payroll to make sure that they can cover payroll for the rest of their staff. So we know they're relying on thinnest margins, and 80 to 90% of their revenue is going to pay the staff a wage that isn't even worthy of them. And so at the legislature, that's something that we put prime focus on. I will say that's one of the big heartburn areas that I have walking away from the session. We were able to make the case in the bonding bill as we have that childcare is infrastructure, just the same as roads and bridges and water. And we did get the $2 million in there for childcare capital grants for rehab preservation, but we need more. We need to boost the ante and inject additional dollars. There was the work around IT modernization, which had many pluses and also some ongoing issues, but around how do we make sure that we lower the administrative burdens while tackling kind of the day-to-day operations. In terms of childcare and the taxes realm, we were able to continue to protect the historic childcare credit, as well as the dependent childcare, to get that relief for families for childcare. I mean, I'll tell you that the best day of my life was when I had to stop paying for childcare for my child, because it was about the same as what I was bringing home or covering for my mortgage. And so that's what our families are dealing with every day. And in Duluth and in this area, as we know, we're grateful to have childcare, whether it's in-home childcare centers, go just a little bit further out, and you might not even have a childcare center for miles and miles. And so we have deserts, we have affordability gaps, and we have big work ahead of us. And that is what we're going to continue to do here at the local level.
One of the other issues that did not get resolved was around school safety and school violence. And so want to take a minute to hear from all three of you on this. Representative Nelson, we'll start with you. It really felt like it came down to two issues that couldn't get resolved. On the school safety side of things, it felt like there was pressure between where funding could go to public schools, charter schools, and private schools. And then an assault weapon ban and a limit of magazines, number of rounds in a magazine. The Senate took a vote and passed a bill that dealt with both of these issues. The House took a procedural vote, but never actually took a vote on this issue. Representative Nelson, your thoughts on that proposal and why it did not move forward?
Well, thank you for the question. And I think one of the biggest unfortunate things about it is that we couldn't do anything on school safety, because there was tying a gun vote with school safety. And yes, there's maybe some correlation there, but at the same time, it is two separate issues. And being that they were tied together, I think it was done intentionally to make a vote that was really difficult to vote for. I think it's unfortunate that we've had a very significant act of violence against our own one of our legislators, one of our colleagues, this almost a year ago, and we did a lot of safety measures around the Capitol, around what's happening there, and none of that was tied directly with gun violence. It was solely in the name of keeping legislators and the staff and everybody who works at the Capitol safe. Yet at the same time, when it came to students, it was going to be absolutely tied to guns and making sure that there was bans, and that's just unfortunate, because it put politicians ahead of students, and I think that's just a terrible place to be.
Representative Lesnikar, your thoughts, and also, many advocates said should have at least taken a vote to see where legislators were at before we go into election season. So on that question, and then just more broadly on the issue.
Yeah, I think, I understand what the question is, and I agree with Representative Nathan Nelson, and what he said is that, we dealt with in the caucus. I supported the bill that was on Capitol security. There was a lot of layers to that, but there was no gun bill tied to that. And I think, from my point of view, there shouldn't have been, because they are two separate issues. And protecting the security at the Capitol, but on the other side of it, I also had a lot of hardship voting for it, because we were dealing with us as elected officials before we were dealing with school safety. And I spent a lot of time at Lakewood Elementary School. I drove to Lakeville in Minnesota to see the SHIELD Act, to see what they had done, and it wasn't hardening our schools; it was just being wise. We cannot legislate somebody's being or their morality for an individual person. We knew we had 40% increase after COVID in mental health issues across the state, as most states have had varying levels of mental health. And so, I wanted to see the systems that were available and what schools. That district chose to do that. And it was a tremendous opportunity to work with mental health professionals, law enforcement, and actually see it firsthand, not just an idea on paper, and to see what other districts have been doing. And the parents that I talked to really wanted that. I felt very strongly that it was important to have all schools have public safety, whether it's charter schools, the same funding for charter schools, public schools, and private schools. And that was a bone of contention, across the other side of the aisle. I didn't see any reason why private schools wouldn't be protected the same way. We need to make sure that safeties there and learning. And a lot of the other states have done initiatives to that. I've seen it firsthand, and it has made a difference. And so, I looked at the things of the anonymous reporting. Representative Nadeau did a great job writing a bill, and it addressed things that made sense to me, as far as making sure that if you see something, know something, say something. And in many of these cases that have involved tragedy, there have been clues, and there have been things that people say afterwards. Somebody should have seen this as a flag, and why they didn't, I can't answer to that. But what we can do is look at solutions that that would prevent some of these things going forward. And so, I think it's unfortunate that they were tied together. And I think it was an intentional thing to tie them together, because it wasn't tied together in the situation with the Capitol security. And we had many conversations on the Capitol security. It was a big investment. And we saw changes at the Capitol of coming through this year, which I was okay with, because we had, a lot of tragedies to deal with. And we want to make sure that our judges and our elected officials are safe. But we also need to make sure that our schools are safe in their work environment, which is school at K through 12. And so I thought that was a really important thing. And, we got some things through this year, but not the level of the package of school safety that we had put together, as well as making sure that we had issues with prevention and equipment and capital investments for the schools. That was all available in the package and the reporting. And so, we got some things done this year, but I think without a doubt, we should have gotten a lot more done on that. And there will be more conversations regarding that. But, on the situation, how it went, it was voted on at committee levels. It didn't pass. We're at a 67-67. And everybody understands that there's going to be different opinions on different topics. And on this topic, it was very obvious there was solutions. We had many solutions that we brought forward before the last night of session, and to deal with this in a meaningful way, where we could look at, like, what can we do, and what can we do to hold criminals accountable, and to make sure that we're following the laws that we have. We have a lot of laws in place where we're just rinse and repeat. Criminals are being arrested, they got pulled over, but the police are telling me over and over they can't do anything. They found a gun, but the gun wasn't a part of the arrest. And so you're seeing, basically a slap on the hand, and that's not okay. And Minnesotans see that. And so we can't, I have dear friends who had a son assassinated in the late 90s, and have told me over and over how devastating it was. I have cried with them numerous times. I understand the heartache, but they also told me these juveniles and adults had a long rap sheet, a long rap sheet. There were so many flags before this happened where their son was murdered. And I think we have to be looking at what are we doing to help people with mental health initiatives and school programs and resources. We worked really hard to get the school resource officers back in the schools after 2023, when the law was changed. And that is a really important thing, to have these school resources in the schools, so we can make sure that there's a trusted advisor to triaging these things, so that we can do things. Nobody wants to see a tragedy happen at anybody that's participating on this panel. We come at it from different opinions, but I know that all of us want to protect kids, and we're going to keep working to do that.
Representative Kozlowski, you participated in a sit-in, actually, for getting a vote on this measure. Your thoughts on both the assault weapons ban and school safety issues that did not get addressed this session?
Great. I'll say, coming into the session, we had years and years and years of violence that has continued to escalate and grown. It is not new, but we are coming in with the sting of the grief of our forever speaker, Melissa Hortman, and Mark and Gilbert, and our colleague Senator Hoffman and his family, as well as many of us being on the assassination list from Annunciation. The next day after Annunciation was a shooting within our Latina community at a school. And before that, I can think back to Parkland, to the Pulse nightclub, to the Aurora malls. And after every single one of those school shootings, where I really believe that we need to continue to lean into is actually going after these gun manufacturers. Who profits the most in a system of violence is actually the gun manufacturers. After every school shooting, we have seen an increase in the purchase and sale of weapons. And what this bill was doing, what this package, what the whole sit-in, the purpose was, is to just say, no matter what your vote, yes or no, Minnesotans deserve to know where their elected officials stand on gun violence prevention. And so that is why I ultimately made the decision with many colleagues and community to begin the sit-in and say it's never too late to change your mind. We do need to take a comprehensive approach to this bill, which it does that. It tackles the high capacity magazines. We heard from students who said being able to lower that down to, I believe the House bill had it 12 bullets. Every second matters. That in that time that the shooters are reloading with those weapons of war is the time that they had to be able to escape, to get behind a bench, to get behind another wall, into safety. And also around strengthening our red flag laws, which we passed. And I'll say in Minnesota, there's been over 468 uses of those, and predominantly I'm very proud that we did this work, but sad that it is happening that Duluth is the highest user of the red flag laws. It's working. We've seen that here in a school in Duluth, where we were able to get some time, get a pause, and get the person help and get those weapons out of their hands. We also have passed background checks. This bill also took measures to make sure that we're registering weapons so that folks who we know who has weapons and we know people who should not have weapons do not have access to those, and that they get the pause needed, which is what social workers, which is what mental health professionals are saying. Just 36 hours would have made the difference between, a death by a suicide or a school shooting, and that community and those people being able to remain safe. We register our cars, we register our snowmobiles. I think Minnesotans are saying it is not too much to demand that we do the same thing for firearms. And I'll say that we know that gun violence doesn't happen in a vacuum. One of the things that we were able to get across, as was mentioned, is the anonymous threat reporting, which also Representative Carrie Raybrower, who is on our housing committee, understands that it is not just about preventing the violence at the point of crisis, but long before. We need to invest in housing and healthcare. And so this package that invests in education with the anonymous threat reporting also invests $10 million in compensatory aid, which is going at a time when mental health, special education, holistic wraparound supports, food, housing, healthcare are being destabilized for Minnesotans. We need to make sure that we are not over criminalizing communities that we have underfunded historically and contemporarily, that we're making sure that we're giving our young people, our seniors, every opportunity to be a part of our social fabric, to be able to get the mental health supports that they need, to be able to have the housing, the access to food, to be able to live a life and afford a stable, healthy life that doesn't put you in the moments of crisis. And so that is what we are really after here.
Well, we only have a couple minutes left, and I want to get to at least one more topic that received a lot of discussion in northeastern Minnesota. And we could probably spend a whole show on it, and that is data centers. One proposal in particular seemed to have some momentum, and that was for public officials to be barred from signing non-disclosure agreements. Made some progress, but ultimately did not become law. And so, like I said, we could talk about the whole data center issue, but I just want to focus on this one in particular. Why do you feel that this issue did not get over the finish line? Representative Nelson, we're going to start with you.
Thank you. And data centers, they're definitely a very touchy subject, and I think there's so much that we rely on with our technology and things, but as they're growing, and kind of the news around them of the water usage, the energy usage, and the non-disclosure agreement of many businesses use them with local governments coming in, whether it's a large store or something like that. I think it's I don't know the final details of why it ended up stopping, but I think that they can be a useful tool. However, I think with the uncertainty, it is also dangerous to not know what's happening in your community.
Representative Kozlowski.
I'll say that there were higher interests, powerful corporate interests, as well as squarely in the Republican leadership, that when this bill came to committee and it died on a party line vote. And that was very disappointing because we had Republicans, Democrats, independents across broad coalition, making sure that Minnesotans know what their elected officials are doing and making sure that there's a democratic process.
All right. Representative Lesnikar, your thoughts on why NDAs did not get over the finish line?
I think there were competing priorities. I think that's a true statement. I was the chief author for banning elected officials for non-disclosure agreements on the data centers. And I completely understand that. It's a new business line, and it's something that's really going to take a lot of energy. It's not the first one in our region. I learned in all my research that we have a data center right off of Rice Lake Road behind United Health. And so that occurred over 10 years ago, I believe, when we got our first data center. And so technology is advancing. And so we have to find solutions, but we also need to have the citizens involved in understanding all their questions on water and noise and air and how it's going to affect all of us. And so I think those are fair questions. And then we have to look at, what we're going to gain moving forward and what the concerns are and balance those out in a healthy, productive way. And I think we'll get there.
Well, and we could talk about this issue and a whole bunch more, but unfortunately we are out of time. I'd like to thank Representatives Kozlowski, Nelson, and Lesnikar for joining us this evening, answering your questions and sharing their thoughts. This is our last show of the season, and I want to thank you for watching. For the team here at PBS North, I'm Tony Surdich. Have a great evening.